There. Okay, I think we're about ready to start. Hi, I'm Charles Kaler, President of the League of Women Voters of Lane County. Welcome to our March speaker series brought to you on third Thursdays of the month. We come to you virtually with the help from Rhonda Livesay and Terry Parker. Thank you very much. And we live on the traditional land of the Kalapuya people, whose descendants are citizens of both the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. We honor the land and the people who have cared for it and reaffirm our commitment to steward and honor the land through our league's work. Okay. Got some announcements. We partner with other organizations in the area, and right now, Paula Grisafi is representing our league at the Springfield City Club's Forum of Candidates for the Oregon's 4th District. It's being recorded, and you will be able to view the 1.5-hour event once it's posted on the Springfield City Club's website. The candidates are vying for the seat to replace Peter DeFazio at the beginning of next year. We're working on a possible forum of candidates for next month's third Thursday event. Stay tuned and we'll let you know. Okay, now I've lost things, so you gotta hang in there with me. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna introduce our special guest, who is Mr. Rooney, and he's been employed with the Oregon Employment Department for the past 24 years. First as a workforce analyst and now as a regional economist stationed in Eugene. Previous to the Oregon Employment Department, he worked as an analyst for ICF International, an engineering and economics consulting firm. Mr. Rooney is responsible for covering the economic conditions of the Douglas and Lane counties. His duties include making the estimates of the current employment by industry and contributing to the estimate of unemployment rates. He also produces and/or distributes a wide variety of additional economic information, including industry employment forecasts, wage and income data, and demographic statistics. Mr. Rooney is a graduate of Oregon State University with a master's degree in economics and of George Washington University with a bachelor's degree in economics as well. When I mentioned to a former speaker, Alexis Biddle's championship stone skipping skills, Brian admitted to some experience in the sport with less success, having been beaten by his 19-year-old son, whose arm is more lithe and who could bend lower. His less competitive free time activities nowadays are gardening and fly fishing, which he believes to be a little mundane. Given what's been going on nowadays, it sounds therapeutic. After Mr. Rooney's presentation, we'll have time for some questions. You can begin to ask now, and as they come to mind, via Q&A. We prefer that you don't use chat, and we'll save them for after. All right, Brian, you're up.
Hey, thank you, Charles C. Let me share my screen and see if I can get this going.
Very good.
Is that looking right?
No, it's not correct, Brian. It's not coming through.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, I'm going to put it on slideshow. How's that?
That's good.
Okay. All right. Well, as long as you can see my slides and everyone can hear me, I'm going to get going on this. Today, we're going to talk about employment and unemployment trends, labor shortage, which has affected most employers. And we have relatively new employment forecasts. They came out in November, so they're still relatively new. Employment and unemployment during the recovery from pandemic losses. So what this chart shows is total non-farm employment seasonally adjusted. And if we look at the chart, we can see that we bottomed out in the Great Recession around 2012 and started an extended employment recovery. And we were doing fine until the spring of 2020, and the bottom just basically dropped out within about a 2-month period. So in the spring of 2020, between February and April, Lane County lost 26,600 jobs, or 16% of its employment. Since then, we've gained back 18,800 jobs, or about 65 of what was lost. And that's with the latest numbers in January 2022. If we look at the recovery from the pandemic, we can see a couple little glitches here. One is at the end of 2020, when there was a resurgence of COVID, and the other is at the end of 2021, and that's the Omicron. So as we've been recovering, the disease has basically been dictating the employment recovery. It's been, I guess, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Compared to the statewide, Oregon lost 14% of the jobs in the spring of 2020. And by January 2022, it had gained back 82% of the jobs that were lost. In the spring of 2020, areas with higher concentrations of jobs in restaurants and hotels, like the North Coast and Deschutes County for that matter, were harder hit. So this has been a relatively fast jobs recovery. What this chart shows is in red, the COVID recession and recovery, and in blue, the Great Recession. We're 24 months into the recovery from the COVID recession. And during the Great Recession, we had just hit bottom after 24 months, and we had a long, long way to go to get back to pre-pandemic levels. Lane County employers added 5,900 jobs in the 12 months leading up to January 2022. And that's as many jobs as were added in the 30 months leading up to the pandemic recession. So even though we were having relatively strong job growth before the pandemic, we're seeing very rapid job growth at this point over the year, anyway, over the past couple of months. As I said before, whenever there's a spike in COVID, the employment numbers slow down. Okay, so most industries continue to rebound from the pandemic recession. In January, total payroll employment is up 5,900 jobs, or 3.9% over the year. So that's very rapid employment growth. In 2019, 2018, we were seeing around 1%, 1.5% over the year. So we continue to see this rebound. Some industries, construction, manufacturing, retail trade, and financial activities are back to their pre-pandemic levels. Some of those industries, construction and manufacturing, were hurt by the COVID pandemic restrictions, but not quite as much as some other industries. And same with financial activities, but they're back to pre-recession levels. If we look at some of the other industries, the ones with the largest rebounds were probably affected the most. Of course, leisure and hospitality, that's the restaurant and hotel jobs, having a nice rebound right now at 5,300 over the year. And in government, that 1,700, that is public schools, including the University of Oregon, reopening. If we look at the negative industries here, professional and business services, that's mostly temporary firms and call centers, travel arrangement. They've been having a hard time coming back. But 1,100 looks like a large employment loss. Professional and business services is a large industry, has about 17,000 jobs in Lane County. And education and health services, that's private education. So it's mostly health services is down over the year. And the biggest proportion of that loss is in residential care facilities. There's some in doctor's offices. And so that probably has to do with the length of the pandemic. Just 2 years of having to deal with the pandemic in a health service occupation has caused a lot of turnover in that industry. And we would expect, as COVID subsides or we learn to live with it, that those health services jobs will come back. So this is unemployment rates seasonally adjusted. Lane County's January 2022 unemployment rate stood at 4.4%. And that's down from 7.5% a year ago in January, and down from a high of 14.4% in April of 2020. So before the pandemic, Lane County had reached a record low rate of 3.3% in December of 2019. So, we went from a record low to a near record high in a matter of a couple of months. Oregon's statewide rate was 4.3% in January, and the US unemployment rate was 4%. So we've been tracking pretty well with the national and statewide rates. So this is Oregon unemployment rates by county. And COVID kind of rearranged the distribution of county unemployment rates. Historically, urban areas, the Valley and Deschutes County had lower rates, and more rural counties in Eastern and Southern Oregon had higher rates. Because of the nature of the recession and the pandemic, restrictions affected urban and tourism dependent counties more. And so the distribution kind of flipped so that urban areas had higher rates and rural areas had lower rates. Right now, we're starting to get back to the historic county unemployment distribution. So right now, it's kind of a mixed bag. There are still some very low rates in the rural areas in Eastern Oregon. Harney County has a very low rate. Wheeler County has the lowest rate in January of 3%. But we're starting to see the urban area around Portland and down into the Valley. We're starting to see rates relative to other areas in the state come down. The highest rate was Grant County at 5.7%, which for Eastern Oregon, historically, that's a very low rate. You look at the difference between the highest and lowest unemployment rate, it's not very much compared to what we're used to seeing historically. So really right now, almost everybody in the state, almost all counties are experiencing a low unemployment rate. Okay, now I'm going to talk about labor shortage. It's been a problem for several months and it has affected almost all employers. And we'll take a look at how broad-based it is. So this is what it looks like. This chart is from our job vacancy survey. And employers reported a record number of vacancies in the fall of 2021. And yet in the summer of 2021 was a record at that time also. So you can see we're kind of just going along, seasonal shifts, and maybe we were down a little bit at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. But in 2021, these vacancies really just skyrocketed. And this only represents private job vacancies, private sector. So the public sector isn't included in this estimate of vacancies for Lane County. In the fall of 2021, the most recent data, there were 11,460 job openings in Lane County businesses that they were trying to fill. So what's fueling record levels of job vacancies? Well, first we can look at the demand side. On top of people being locked down and not being able to go out to eat or go on vacation, there's some natural pent-up demand there. But also, there was a lot of government stimulus applied to this recession. So this chart shows trillions of dollars in federal government stimulus on the vertical, and on the horizontal shows the number of days since the beginning of the recession. So if we look at the Great Recession, relatively small stimulus, 200 days out, mortgage guarantee bill, maybe a year out, TARP, pretty big one. But I think that was mostly for financial institutions. And then finally, 787 billion, almost a year or two, it's a year and a half out from the beginning of the recession. In the COVID recession, we started adding money from day one. This 8 billion preparedness bill, that's right at the beginning of the recession. And then we go along, we had the CARES Act, largely for small businesses, but really everybody benefited from that, 2.4 trillion. Go along PPP, healthcare enhancement, COVID relief bill, less than a year out, not 900 billion. And then just about a little over a year out from the beginning of the COVID recession, the 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. So the economy got a lot of stimulus very quickly. And that increased household incomes and savings rates. So household incomes actually increased during the recessionary period, which is very rare. And it was because of all the government spending. So all this demand for goods and services creates demand for jobs to make and fill those goods, and make and provide those goods and services. So on the supply side, first, people were staying home because of COVID. We saw record quits, with the lack of supply of labor, tight labor market. People saw that they could, there was opportunity elsewhere for them to find a better job. Most of the quits have been in lower paying jobs, and it's people looking for higher paying jobs. The quits have come down just a little bit in recent months. Less in-migration is kind of a big one. Oregon depends on in-migration to increase its labor force. Our natural rate of increase is very low. So, during the pandemic and during the recovery from the pandemic, people just were locked down, not moving much. They were staying home. So Oregon saw less in-migration. And finally, on the labor supply side, retirements. Retirements were a problem restricting labor supply before the pandemic and then during the pandemic, and retirements are going to be a problem for years to come as far as labor supply is concerned. So why didn't the end of enhanced unemployment insurance also end worker shortages? And, right off the bottom line is there really weren't that many people collecting unemployment when the enhanced benefits ended last September. A lot of people went back to work in the spring and summer of 2021. So, but just to put it into perspective, we'll look at Lane County on this table. So regular claims ended when the enhanced benefits ended. There were 4,228 people collecting regular benefits. And that's, just what you consider unemployment benefits. It's when somebody loses a payroll job, their employer's been paying into the system, they collect unemployment benefits. So if we were to take those workers, and if every one of those workers filled one of these vacancies that we had in the summer of 2021, when the enhanced benefits ended, they would only fill 38% of those vacancies. So now we also had the PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, which was for self-employed people. There were roughly 3,300 of those. So if we add those in, we get the 7571. And if we apply that to the vacancies that were open when the enhanced benefits ended last September, it would fill 68% of the vacancies. So that's substantial, but not very realistic. First of all, the people who were on PUA, they were self-employed. They're likely to go back to being self-employed, while these vacancies are payroll jobs. Also, just because the enhanced benefits ended doesn't mean somebody necessarily has to go back to work. They can continue collecting regular benefits. So yeah, just the bottom line is that there weren't that many people collecting those enhanced benefits when they ended. You know, it may have helped loosen up the labor supply a little bit, but it wasn't enough to really be noticeable. So this is job vacancies by industry 2021. And this is kind of the annual average for 2021. And that's why the total vacancies is a little lower than the record that we saw in the fall of 2021. This includes an average that includes the vacancies in the winter and spring of 2021. And the main thing about this is just to show how broad-based this labor shortage is. First of all, healthcare and social assistance always has the largest number of vacancies. A very large industry, a lot of demand for healthcare occupations and social assistance occupations for that matter. But if we go on down the line, you know, construction and manufacturing hardly ever have this many vacancies. And in fact, those are records. Leisure and hospitality has a large number of vacancies. Retail trade, I think that was a record also. So just, you know, on down the line, everybody has, you know, either increased level of vacancies or, you know, a record level of vacancies in 2021. So very broad based, affecting most employers. And as I said before, these are private sector vacancies, and we've seen in the local school districts that they've been hiring as in-person classes start up again. And you know, we heard anecdotally that there were shortages of bus drivers, shortages of substitute teachers, and you know, that caused the school schedule to become somewhat unreliable. They were having unannounced days off because they didn't have substitute teachers or people to drive the buses. That's gotten a little better. Okay, struggling beyond the pandemic. As I said, retirements were a problem before. Retirements have been restricting labor supply before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and they will for a while. If we look at this chart, since the early 90s, retirement is the largest reason that a person is not in Oregon's labor force. So the number of people who are in Oregon's labor force due to retirement grew by 21% between 2016 and 2019. So that's, you know, this just before the pandemic, this big increase in the level of retired people and the reason that they're not in the labor force. So this is expected to continue. Lane County's share of workers, 55 plus, is 25% of the workforce. So 25% of the workforce in Lane County is liable to be retiring over the next 10 to 15 years. So as I said before, we're expecting retirements to restrict labor supply going forward. So some workers still have barriers to getting back to work. And this is where going forward, we're going to see some people coming into the labor force. So we'll take a look at the chart first. This is from the Census Bureau Household Pulse Survey, and it's adults not working and not retired at the time of the survey by reason for not working. So first off, the bars show, the orange bars are the first week of February, and that's the most recent survey, and the blue are the first week of December 2021. So over that time period, the total people not working dropped by about 40,000 in Oregon. So that's a good sign to start off with. So when we look at the reasons that are related to COVID restrictions, like caring for children, laid off due to COVID, or the employer went out of business due to COVID, these two down here, those have all declined over the period. In the meantime, I was caring for someone or sick myself with coronavirus symptoms actually increased. So this is an indication that we're moving on despite the disease. COVID is still with us, but we're opening back up. As we go forward, more workers should enter the labor force in the not so immediate future. This is going to take time. But as schools reopen and childcare shortages are addressed, we should see more people able to enter the labor force. Those school schedules have become more regular, allowing some people to get back into the labor force. Childcare has been a problem for years. There was a survey done a few years back where 76% of Oregon communities were considered childcare deserts. So hopefully we're going to see some work helping those shortages. There's been some funding coming down the pike for childcare, and it's become a legislative priority. So hopefully we're going to see some improvement there. Sickness from COVID abates. We're starting to see that, but with people getting vaccinated, we should see the sickness from COVID abate, and that allows people to get into the labor force. And then concern for getting or spreading COVID lessens. I think we're seeing that right now. People aren't masking up. They're feeling pretty confident. Households run out of savings. So this should increase the labor force. We saw all that stimulus that was put into the economy in 2021. In March of 2021, the household savings rate was around 26%, which is very high. It was even higher in 2020. Most recently, I believe it was January, it's January, the household savings rate was 6.4%, which is about what it was pre-COVID, maybe even a little less. So those households are starting to run out of the savings that they built up in 2021. And as those savings run out, they've got to put food on the table, and people will look for jobs. Also, immigration should increase as the pandemic abates. People will become more confident looking for a job elsewhere. Oregon can be an attractive place to move to. And hopefully we'll have, good jobs with good pay and relatively low housing costs, and we can attract a bunch of workers to Oregon. Okay, so now I'm going to go over the forecast. As I said, it came out in November. And so this forecast is for 2020 to 2030. So Lane County jobs are projected to increase by 15% by 2030. And that's a fairly strong growth rate. 1.5% annually is a strong growth rate, except when you're coming out of a pandemic and it's 3-4%. Basically, the industries that were affected the most by the pandemic are expected to have strong rebound. So here we have leisure and hospitality, strong rebound, and then some growth on top of that. And we've been seeing that over the past year. Private education and health services, the demand for health services is expected to increase. It's just the aging of the population, the aging, growing population creates demand for health services. And then professional and business services is expected to have a rebound. And on down the line, almost all industries are expected to have growth openings, except for federal government. And the federal government, we're expecting to see some efficiencies as far as the postal services goes there. Oregon statewide is expected to increase 16% by 2030. And you'll notice Lane County tracks really well statewide with most of these statistics. Our industry structure matches the statewide industry structure pretty closely. So in a lot of ways, we track closely with the statewide. So statewide, a little stronger at 16% over the 10-year period. And then some of the areas that are expected to grow fastest are Central Oregon. They were pretty dependent on leisure and hospitality. plus. That's a fast growth area. So we're expecting to see the strongest growth there at 18%. The Portland area was hit pretty hard by COVID restrictions. We're expecting a strong rebound there. And then Northwest Oregon is one of those areas that's dependent on hotel and restaurant jobs. And so we're expecting to see a strong rebound there. Okay, so this graph includes replacement openings. So these are the industries, a little more detailed than the previous graph, but these are the industries. The yellow bars are the growth openings that we saw on the previous chart. The blue are replacement openings. And there are two kinds of replacement openings. There are exits, and that's when somebody leaves an occupation by leaving the labor force. That's largely from retirements. And then also transfer openings. And that's when somebody stays in the labor force, but goes to a new occupation. And a lot of times that's through advancement. And sometimes that's related to retirement also. So the point here is, though, is that no matter what industry you want to be in, there's a lot of opportunity going forward. If you have the good soft skills, you're sober and able to show up on time and work. And then you have the right training and education for the occupation you want to pursue. So there's a lot of opportunity coming up over the next 10 years. So that's it. Here's my contact information. Our website, most of the data that I showed you here today is on our qualityinfo.org website. And we also have a subscription service where you can get our data and publications sent to your email shortly after it's published. So with that, I'll take some questions. Charlize, I think that you're muted.
You want to take down your PowerPoint so we can just do Facebook?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. So it sounds like you think that we're going to have a pretty good recovery. That what do you think might be the biggest problem for recovery? Lack of labor?
Well, at this point, there are a lot of risks to the recovery. It's a very unstable environment. First of all, COVID isn't done. We could see new variants, we could see new surges, and that can be a problem. As we saw on a couple of those graphs, every time there's a resurgence of COVID, employment drops off. Of course, right now we're experiencing high inflation rates. The Federal Reserve just raised interest rates for the first time in a couple of years. So that's intended to slow the economy and slow inflation. Right now, labor demand is very strong. Employers want to take advantage of all the pent-up demand and that stimulus money that's being spent. Right now, employment demand is very strong. We have enough jobs for anybody who wants to find a job. But that might change as demand lessens from the increase in the interest rates. And then finally, the Ukraine invasion. Markets don't like uncertainty, and putting sanctions on Russia lessens demand worldwide. So we could see some reaction from markets as the invasion continues and as sanctions against Russia continue. So right now it's just a very turbulent time. There's a lot of risk out there, but our forecasts are over the 10-year period and are based on demand mostly. So that's why we're confident that at least over the 10-year period, we should see strong growth coming out of the most recent recession.
What do you think with a baby boomer retirement, are they very specific to labor types?
Yeah, like in the services industries, it's a younger age group. So they're not quite as affected, some of the management there, but like, retail, leisure, and hospitality, those are mostly a younger age group. In the goods producing industries, though, like in manufacturing, construction, they're losing, 30% of their workforce and a lot of their brain trust yearly. So the goods producing is probably being affected the most by those baby boom retirements.
Yeah, and during the Great Recession, I think it would have been beneficial if we who were not quite 65, maybe 55 or so, would have retired, but we didn't have medical insurance, medical coverage, and we wanted to wait until we were 65. Do we see any correlation there with this? It seems to me, it sounds like that you're saying 55 or over are retiring. Is that right?
Well, no, when I had that statistic that a quarter of the labor force is 55 plus,
Mm-hmm.
I was saying that that within the next 10 to 15 years, that quarter of the labor force will pretty much be gone. And as you said, people are hanging in there for health insurance reasons. If you have health insurance with your job and you retire and you're not eligible for Medicaid, it gets very expensive, or Medicare. It gets very expensive. So yeah, there are people that are staying at their job to keep medical insurance. And in fact, we've seen the labor force participation rate for older age groups increase slightly over the past several years. And whether it's, people need to do it for economic reasons or people find that they like to work, it's ticked up from, it's still very low. It was around 10%. Now it's around 13%. But yeah, you're right. People are staying on the job to keep their health insurance.
Yeah. Although I had a coworker who was eligible to retire. He had an income that would continue and medical insurance. So he retired, and then his wife sent him back to work. So I get that, people go home and then go, now what am I going to do? And end up going back to work.
The people having to stay home for COVID has been a good test run for some people, how retirement's going to look.
Yeah. And then also, I've heard a lot about people are waiting because they want to get a different job, and they want to wait for the right fit and economic, payout. Is there any way you could follow that or have any kind of statistics regarding that?
Boy, there was in that poll survey, there were, I don't know how many it was, those are in the tens of thousands, but there was a category that is, I don't want a job right now, or,
Not just I can't because I'm watching the kids or that kind of thing, but
yeah,
I don't have to go back to work, so I'm going to wait.
Right. And one of the biggest reasons for not being in the labor force is that your spouse has a job. So some people want to work, but as you say, they can afford to shop around. During the during the pandemic also, some people were able to increase their skill and education levels. You're able to do that online now, and they were either laid off and collecting unemployment or working from home, and were able to increase their skill sets over the past couple of years.
Are there any state organizations or not organizations, departments that are working on education training, that kind of thing, to meet some of these standards? Are these requirements? I'm sorry.
Well, the local workforce boards are kind of a conduit for funds to set up training, and it's basically training programs, and they work with the community college and the high schools and kind of decide where training needs to be done. In Lane County, there's a whole group of sectors. Let me think: high tech, construction, aggregate, wood products, a whole host of them. But generally, it's training that it needs to be done where we're seeing a need, but also where you get more bang for your buck, where you're getting people in it on the ground floor. So in other words, we're not training brain surgeons, we're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on one person. So, but your workforce boards are really the conduit for where training dollars are going these days.
And that's from that's the employment department? That's what you're talking about?
The workforce boards are a public nonprofit. They're, a private nonprofit. And they have it's a workforce board. It's mostly private sector people who have input into where the training needs are. And then they get grants. They apply for grants for government money and apply that where it needs to be applied.
Does the Department of Labor have anything? Is that it? They're part of their mission?
Distributing the funds now.
I see.
Yeah, so it's like, the community college and the workforce boards locally.
And how about the trades? Are they involved? I know that's where they're hurting.
Yeah. As I said, one of a couple of the sectors that are being concentrated on in Lane County are construction and aggregate and manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything regarding the renewable resources? Are there any opportunities for learning anything more about that to interest people for that kind of work?
Yeah, generally, a lot of that is an offshoot of being an electrician or being an installer. So it's kind of the skill set's already there. Like installing solar panels is like construction and electrician. They just have to learn a little bit different skill set to do that sort of work. On a percentage basis, like wind turbine maintenance and solar panel installation is a very fast growing occupation, but they're very small occupations at this point.
Okay. From Lois, it says, since the percent of workers retiring has been increasing since 1994, shouldn't that suggest that younger people may be unable to be a larger percentage of workers because of childcare issues and so on? I mean, isn't that sort of a dam preventing more people going back to work?
Yeah. Childcare has been a problem for several years now. As I said, there was a survey done pre-pandemic that it stated that 76% of Oregon communities are childcare deserts, and that is a real barrier. And it's become a legislative priority, both state and federal. And there is some funding out there. I recently gave data for a grant that was towards childcare, getting funding for childcare. But that's relatively small potatoes right now for what seems to be needed to be done.
Interesting. Well, and then there's sort of a corollary here too, is that Linda asked, how much is the housing unaffordability affecting the in-migration to the state and the county?
It is seems to be having an effect. In the past, we had an advantage over other West Coast areas like California. San Francisco and Seattle have very high housing costs. So we had a little bit of a comparative advantage. Over the past few years, we've been catching up with them, and we've seen in-migration. Even before the pandemic, we saw in-migration dropping. And we think that it was because our housing costs are starting to catch up with other areas on the West Coast.
You don't have any crystal ball about how we solve that, do you? You'd be the hero.
Well, I'm afraid it means building more houses, building more apartments and houses. The building permits have not been keeping up with population growth.
Interesting. Okay. Janet asks, there are lots of help wanted signs around. uh, in all types of businesses. What makes jobs appealing, do you think? Is it only wages? Because you see the wages on the sign, you know.
Yeah.
There's got to be more, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. It depends what type of person you are, but yeah. Yeah, wages are important. Wages and benefits are important. Healthcare benefits are very important. But also having a career ladder. One of the ways that employers can keep employees these days is, just showing some concern and, letting them know that they can move up, that there are different jobs that they can do and they can move up in the company. But yeah, you have to, if you're going to work at something long term, you should be doing something you like, regardless.
Here's a really good one. What are the most striking changes you have seen over your 24 years doing this work?
Well, yeah, the baby boom retirements are like a big, a big deal. Technology, and especially manufacturing, that like here in Oregon, we've seen logging and wood products jobs drop, and the industry likes to blame the Northwest Forest Plan, but it's kind of a combination of that and technology. They've really boosted their labor productivity so that they need less workers per board foot that they put out. So I think, yeah, the retiring baby boomers and then how technology has made a lot of industries less labor intensive.
Well, and so if the productivity hasn't been, I mean, the output hasn't been diminished, is that what you're saying? Or has it?
It really hasn't been diminished very much. Back in the, I guess, what was it, the late 80s, there is a lot of logging going on. Productivity was very high then, and that's just when technology was kicking in. But since then, board feet per year has been relatively stable. So
Since when? Since you've been working for the
well, yeah,
employers?
since the 90s,
Wow.
with technology come on, output has been relatively stable, at least for the past couple of decades. We've seen employment go down and output remain relatively stable, depending on the economy. We go into a recession, output goes down, prices go down, output goes down, but relatively stable as employment has gone down steadily in wood products. So, it's an indication that technology is causing the industry to be less labor intensive.
The other thing I might not have understood or noticed, whatever, is how has farm labor been affected by pandemic?
A lot like logging, farm labor hasn't been affected a whole lot. Everybody's been affected to some extent. But since they're outdoors, their occupation requires them to socially distance anyway. There hasn't been a real impact on farm labor because of COVID.
Good questions and good answers. Yeah, what about the things that we think about with Oregon and particularly with land use planning, farming and natural resources? Has that been affected? Those kind of industries been affected?
As I said, somewhat, but if you're working outdoors, like with construction, is an example. Logging and agriculture, as I said, the COVID didn't affect the workers there as much as, say, restaurant jobs, where there were a lot of restrictions. They're working outdoors. They're fairly separate. They weren't affected as much by the COVID pandemic restrictions. Construction is kind of a good example. Construction had a downturn because of COVID restrictions, but it was mostly remodeling because people didn't want other people coming into their house or coming to their house. New home construction stayed fairly stable because they're outdoors, they're social distancing. So they weren't as restricted because of the COVID pandemic.
Here's a really good one. Would permanent daylight savings time impact any industries that you can think of?
Boy. Only to the extent that people may have to change their schedules. I mean,
but not employment.
in the dark 2 months of the year, kids going to school in the dark. I'm not sure if, schools are going to change their schedule, maybe start later in the day, and that would throw some working families' work schedule off. But boy, that is a good question. And if it if it dawns on me that one particular industry could be affected that way, I'll let you know.
Well, I heard when it was being considered at Oregon legislature that the skiing industry, if that's an industry, said that they will lose a lot of skiers who want to get their skiing done early in the morning because it'll be too dark. The other one was golfers who like early tee times. And neither was real compelling for the rest of Oregon, but those are the only two I can think of. But I thought, who knew? But anyway, I have a good question from Ruth. Do you have an opinion on the intersection of minimum wage jobs and employment rates and job vacancies?
Yeah, well, yes, a lot of the vacancies are in lower paying jobs. A lot of those healthcare vacancies are for personal care aides. That's the top healthcare occupation that the vacancies are for. And then also coming out of the pandemic, a lot of the vacancies are for restaurant workers and hotel workers, which may or may not be minimum wage, but darn close anyway.
I'm assuming no healthcare benefits.
That
That-
varies by employer, but generally not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Are there any? We see some names of people we don't recognize, and I think it's. Are there any young economists that want to speak up, have an opinion, want to ask a question?
Yeah, if Nicole and Jake or Jake are here, they can chime in.
Yeah. They'd have to put the question through our chat, or I mean Q&A. So anyway.
Don't be too tough on me, guys.
No, this is a question that the public will want to know.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'll be denigrated for your lack of stone skipping skills. And I don't.
That's important.
Yeah. Well, I think most of us can empathize with not being able to bend so low and don't have lithe arms. So
Right.
we're on your side, Brian.
We'll join the senior stone skipping league.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that Nicole says, I have no questions. You are great. So a little bit of, sucking up to the boss, maybe. I don't know. We'll go back to a question we have here. Do you think the concerns about global warming can affect employment need or the types of jobs available?
Yeah, that's kind of a big thing going forward. It doesn't look like we're going to be doing enough to just stop global warming in its tracks. So we're going to have to expect more forest fires, rising sea levels, big demand for wildland firefighters these days. And then, that entails construction, maritime construction jobs. So yeah, we will see demand created to mitigate the effects of global warming.
You haven't seen anything so far, you don't think?
Well, wildland firefighters, I would say.
Oh, well,
and
that's so temporary, sporadic, right?
Yeah, there are people that work for wildland firefighting private sector companies, and those companies often do thinning and planting in the off season and firefighting during the fire
I
season.
see. I see.
The federal government people usually just work over the summer.
Mhm, mhm. I think we probably know the answer to this, but you might have some data that would support it or not. Universal health care affect employment. Would it help it or hurt it?
No, I think that it would free people up to pursue other occupations, and I don't know how much it would affect. A lot of times those jobs that don't have health insurance are young people starting out. Maybe the job fits their schedule at school. So I don't think that that's going to change a whole lot, but I think that universal health care would allow people to change jobs, change occupations, and might be better in the long run, where people are getting a better fit, getting into a better occupation, increased incomes for people.
Very good. I think we're running out of questions and almost running out of time. So is there anything you'd like to close with, Brian?
Just that great organization, the League of Women Voters, very fact-based.
Yeah.
But I would say that these are uncertain times, and it's going to be interesting to see how we come out of all this, how the COVID is going to progress, whether inflation is going to abate. And a lot of that has to do with labor supply. We talked about the labor shortage. So just going forward, these are interesting times, and making a short-term forecast is next to impossible, really.
We understand. We won't. None of us have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
And if we make the right guess, that might be assumed, but we know it's not real. So thank you for your time today,
Yeah.
Brian. We really appreciate it. That was eye-opening, and it's been an honor. Thank you very much to have
No, thank you.
attend. All right. And to the rest of our audience, we hope to see y'all back next month. Read the newsletter, the Argus. Check your email. We try not to send too many. And look at our website for current events, calls to action, and a treasure trove of our league's work, past and present. Stay safe, be well, onward.